You must gather your party before venturing forth. You must gather your party before venturing forth. You must gather your party before venturing forth.
Have you had a chance to play with your Modern Horizons 2 cards yet in paper? No? Well, fuck you! It's time for the next set. Adventures in the Forgotten Realms arrives on the 23rd of July. It is very, very soon. Current versions of Modern and Legacy would have existed without Adventures cards for 35 days in total. This is just magic now. Previews begin on the 29th, although we have had a few already on the Mothership and over at Polygon as well. My official Wizard sanctioned preview. Hi, I'm Vince, by the way. Also as PleasantKenobi on the internet. I'm very sexy. My free preview, hashtag free preview is on its way. It will be live on my channel on the 3rd of July, so make sure you smash that subscribe button down below and come back to see it. Otherwise, I will fade into obscurity, turning to dust like a dry fart on a sandy beach. Dungeons and, or maybe both at the same time, maybe one or the other, dragons. So the set will have dragons. That's an easy one, right? Magic's had dragons since the dawn of time. And by the dawn of time, I mean like 1993, 1994. But that's an easy one. The question was, how the fuck is the dungeon mechanic going to work? It was hinted at in a very early announcement article. Well, wonder no more. They revealed it in a very nice looking video over on their YouTube channel. I do recommend having a watch of that if you want to get the ins and outs of the rules. I also want to say, whoever did post-production on this, whatever studio they hired or individuals at the company or whoever does this, the video is beautiful. It had dripping water in the background for ambience, and then when they moved through the dungeon, there was lighting that sort of bloomed or spread out from the doors, and it was just great. This video was awesome. So, how do these dungeons that are on screen right now, how do they work? Well, when you venture, you enter a dungeon. So, cards like Shortcut Seeker have a trigger to venture into the dungeon. There are 3 dungeons in total. There is the Lost Mines of, or the Lost Mine, should I say, of Phandelver. I always say mines. There is the Tomb of Annihilation, and there is the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. These cards sit outside of the game. They actually sit alongside your sideboard, but do not take up sideboard slots. Now, when I heard this in the video, I immediately had flashbacks, and they were painful flashbacks to the ludicrously free value that Companions brought to the game from Ikoria. For those of you who don't know, originally Companions just sat on the sideboards, and you could just cast them as long as you had met the requirement on the card with your deck. Most of them, it was basically a freebie. Like the Otter had to be banned in Commander because it's immediately too good, as in like every blue-red deck would just play it as an extra body. People who say it wouldn't have been don't understand how Magic works. And then things like Lurrus, where you had to pay 2 CMC or less permanent in your deck, too easy, way too easy. Lurrus absolutely dominated Vintage, Legacy, and Modern. A few of the others were good too, the Kraken for example. But basically, Companions were ruining the fucking game for everybody. Now, it did get errated, and it's better than it was. They're still relatively omnipresent throughout the formats. You will see them in Modern quite a bit, but at least they aren't what they were when they first came. But let's put the comparison to Companions to bed for now. These certainly feel or evoke a similar feel to Companions when you start hearing how they work, but I think a more apt comparison is probably the lessons that we saw from Strixhaven. Whilst Companion was just free real estate and it made everyone involved feel dirty and in need of a deep anus colonic irrigation to feel clean again, there was minimal to no setup required for those things. These dungeons require you to trigger them via the venture keyword action on other cards, similar to how you would learn lessons in Strixhaven. Some cards will ETB, so we have the Shortcut Keeper for an ETB, for example. Meanwhile, more powerful, that's a common, right? So rare versions, Nadar, for example, will enter the battlefield and trigger on attacking as well. More on these cards in a moment. When you venture, if you're not in a dungeon, you select one of the 3 dungeons and you put it into the command zone, and then you enter the first room and resolve its trigger. In the case of the Lost Mines of Phandelver, that's Scry 1. Then each time you venture after this, you make a decision of which door to enter through, which room to go into, and which trigger to create. So again, in the case of the Lost Mines of Phandelver, it either creates a treasure token or makes you a 1/1 red goblin. So on and so on to get to the end, and then when you venture out of the last room or go into the last room, and that's just your check, you've completed the dungeon. These are incredible successes of flavor. This is you going on an adventure through a dungeon. You can get into them, your opponent gets into their one, each player can be in one dungeon at a time, I believe. I think this is a wonderful piece of design that I think the effects on the dungeons are low powered enough that I don't think this is going to be some sort of degenerate thing that, like, you know, infects every single format. A fun anecdote, I was at my game store last night playing Warhammer 40k for the first time since the pandemic, and, well, since lockdown broke out. Let's not say the pandemic's over, because it's not, but since lockdown was lessened in England, and there was a Magic conversation going on, and somebody said in the general conversation in the room, because we're talking back and forth between tables, oh, it's a shame that Strixhaven Lessons didn't see any like standard play on Arena, or can't be played in Commander and stuff. My point was, it was nice that we had a cool mechanic that was interesting for Limited and for the set itself, but then didn't immediately just break everything wide open like Companion did. So I think this is going to be similar to Lesson, where people might say, oh, it's a shame we didn't see much play in Modern or Legacy, but I don't know if that's a shame, honestly. I think it's okay to have mechanics that we play with in Limited and Standard, and maybe make a small splash somewhere, and then we just move on. That's better than Companion absolutely taking a massive diarrhea dump on absolutely everything. So far, so good, in my opinion. Keep in mind there are only 3 dungeons shown so far. I'm under the impression that these are the only ones, but maybe there's one more on the way in the Commander product, for example. I'm not sure. But I'm under the impression that these are the only ones. All of which are named and themed after existing 5th edition modules, by the way. All of these are existing dungeons in D&D. The Lost Mines that we focused on is the starter one. Like, I have played through the Lost Mines with my physical playgroups. It's really cool to see it here. Tomb of Annihilation and the Dungeon of the Mad Mage are modules that they're kind of iconic. They've been in other versions of D&D before, in older editions, and they've been revamped. Tomb of Annihilation being the one that my current paper group were playing through just before COVID put a stop to that. So I think that's just, again, a really cool throwback that isn't just a card called the Tomb of Annihilation or something. So when you complete a dungeon, it can have a positive effect on the game ongoing. The new Planeswalker, Eliwick Tumblestrum, which I think is an incredible name, I love it. As well as the new, this white common that I didn't write down the name of in my script, but it'll be on screen now. These both get an improvement if you complete a dungeon. This feels very much a limited thing. I actually think Eliwick Tumblestrum is just not very good from a constructed standpoint. It's very cool, though, that you get to tick up each turn and just venture further into the dungeon. I think that's a really cool mechanic. I don't think it's going to be that strong. But in Limited, some of your commons will come double strikers, some of your commons will grow and stuff. Nadar himself as well has an anthem effect for all your creatures depending on how many dungeons you completed. I would actually give Nadar a shot. I might still do it, try and play dungeons and Death and Dungeons, or Dungeons and Taxes, or whatever. Problem is that Nadar is frustratingly a 3/3, so he can't be tutored by any of the tutors that you play in Legacy. You can violate him and you can flick him with Displacer and Wisp, so I might just try displacing myself to the end of a dungeon in Modern. Probably going to lose some games because of that. Honestly, before we move on from the dungeons themselves, I think that the only way that these show up in Modern or Legacy in a way that is actually good is if we see some really broken cards that tangentially have dungeon attached to them. So, for example, if we had an Oko-style Planeswalker that had, Venture the Dungeon attached to one of its abilities, or alternatively, we have a way that is very cheap and easy to venture multiple times. So if we see, I don't know, an artifact or enchantment that you can pump mana into to activate, to venture, well, that could be a very good mana sink in some sort of deck that makes big mana. Or if we see a land that allows you to venture. What I could see is Legacy lands might want Tomb of Annihilation to have a way to attrition your opponent out. The 4/4 at the end of it is icing on the cake. We've had a land that taps just to venture, and you could then, if it wasn't legendary, you could duplicate, I don't know, Adventurous Tavern, for example. You could then copy it with Vesuva or with Thespian Stage more likely, and you get multiple ventures per turn, so you're just oublietting and Veil of Fearing your opponents, so everyone's discarding cards all over the place. It could be a real good way for a deck like lands to attrition your opponent. However, we haven't seen that yet, and it might not be something to go down the route of them. This might be very safe. Strixhaven was a safe set. It was mechanically complex enough. It was word-wise quite a wordy set, but there wasn't really anything in it that was broken in half. So maybe we're on the downturn of standard power level after 2 years of absolute broken nonsense. On the topic of the other cards, I've already mentioned that Eliwick isn't very good. I'm not going to focus on the commons, honestly. Nadar is interesting for another reason beyond me forcing it into a Death and Taxes shell upon release. Nadar is a Dragonborn. These are creatures that are part dragon. They are descended from dragons, similar to how kobolds may or may not be as well. But the Dragonborn are descended from dragons. But this Dragonborn paladin here, and Dragonborn is one of the creature types in D&D that people play when they don't want to be an elf, a dwarf, a human, or a halfling. It's normally for the people who want to feel more special, in my opinion. There's always one in there who has to play a Dragonborn or a Tiefling or half angel or some shit. But he's a Dragonborn, but his creature type is not Dragonborn Knight, or Paladin for that matter. So all Paladins will be Knights, as they always have been in MTGs. That's something we've learned here as well. Knight isn't part of the party mechanic, if I remember correctly, either. But interestingly, any Dragonborn creatures we get, like Nadar, and there must be a few more, because Dragonborn's quite a big part of D&D now, will be Dragon. I don't really know where that will be relevant, outside of like Dragon-themed EDH decks. I mean, Tiamat, for example, can summon this two-hand, so with her DB. So, yeah, I think that's just an interesting window into what's coming with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. And lastly, before we finish out the video, I do want to engage with some of the criticisms of the dungeons. Maybe I should have done this before I went on to talk about Nadar and Dragonborn, but structure isn't my strong point. Some people have said this feels more like a board game than a card game mechanic. And honestly, I agree, but it's emulating Dungeons & Dragons, which is the most complicated and probably one of the best, if not the best, board game ever made. I know it's not technically a board game, but it exists in the same space and the same spheres and the same sort of hobby feel. So yeah, the fact that it feels that way is actually really cool. I would actually love it. Here's the thing that people will fucking hate. I would love if we get a Monopoly secret lair in the future that allows you to venture a dungeon, and it brings into the game a Monopoly dungeon, which is just the Monopoly board with, like, you know, 8 of the squares in a circle or whatever, and you can pass go to gain 10 life or 2 life or whatever. I don't give a shit. I think that would be very funny. Probably should be in Silver Border, probably shouldn't be brought to Magic, but let's be honest, they've opened the door to some fucking nonsense now with the secret lairs and stuff. So, anyway, yes, it does feel like a board game thing, and no, I don't really see the problem. Is there a tracking issue with this? No. I wonder if these are going to be in abundance, so whether these are actually worth some money in like 10 years time when they've all been destroyed and people don't have them anymore. How many dungeons have you completed? It's not hard to remember that. I don't know if this is really much of a tracking issue. Is it complicated? No, I don't think it's any more complicated than any other part of Magic the Gathering. But maybe I've played so much Warhammer recently that I'm super big brain now and I can comprehend incredibly complicated and convoluted rule systems. Maybe it's just that. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Smash that subscribe button to see my preview next week. I'll have more stuff on D&D coming up. I'm going to do a separate video talking about some of the aesthetic elements that I am absolutely in love with for this set. I am fucking hyped. It feels good. Perpetual hype season, all that jazz. Smash a like, leave me a comment, let me know what you think of the dungeons, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ta for now.